They laughed as they stole $50,000 from my bank account, right there in my mother's kitchen. I didn't scream. I pressed record. The week before Christmas, I stood outside my parents' kitchen and listened to them steal $50,000 from my bank account. They laughed about using my hard-earned money to rent a Porsche for my unemployed brother-in-law, while planning to ban me from Christmas dinner because I was single and shameful. I did not kick the door down. I did not scream. I pulled out my phone, pressed record, and prepared to burn their entire world to the ground. Before I tell you how I turned their greed into my greatest victory, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to smile at the people who betrayed you. My name is Zara, and I am 32 years old. To my family in Atlanta, I am just a struggling consultant who got lucky with a few contracts. They see my modest clothes and my sensible car and assume I am just getting by. They have no idea that I am a luxury brand strategist who owns a portfolio of real estate and tech stocks worth millions. I kept my success quiet because I wanted them to love me for who I was, not for what I could buy them. I see now that was a mistake. They did not love me for either. I had driven down to their house a week early to surprise them. I left my G-Wagon in the garage of my penthouse and took the dented 2015 Honda Civic I kept specifically for family visits. I had 3 tickets to Paris in my bag, intended as a Christmas gift for my parents and my younger sister Bianca. I wanted to see their faces light up. I wanted to feel like a good daughter. I arrived 20 minutes earlier. I hugged my mother Patricia and my sister Bianca, who was lounging on the sofa. I left my unlocked personal phone on the kitchen island to use the restroom down the hall. It was a habit born of trust, a habit that would cost me $50,000. He was a white real estate agent who had been unemployed for 6 months, though my family pretended he was a mogul. I felt a cold stone settle in my stomach. $50,000. That was not a small loan. That was theft. Make sure you leave enough in there so she does not notice immediately, my father added, and buy her a cheap scarf or something so she feels included. But listen to me, Patricia. Do not invite her to the main dinner on Christmas Eve. Why not? Bianca asked, her thumb hovering over my screen. Because the Walkers are classy people, my father said, his voice dripping with disdain. They do not want to see a 32-year-old spinster at the table. She is too loud, she is too independent, she ruins the family aesthetic. We need to look successful, and Zara just looks desperate. I leaned my head against the wall. A spinster, desperate, ruins the aesthetic. This was how they spoke of the daughter who had quietly paid off their mortgage last year under the guise of an anonymous inheritance because I did not want to embarrass them. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I swallowed them down. Crying was for victims. I was not a victim. I was a strategist, and I had just been handed the most valuable asset in any war: intelligence. I slowly pulled my work phone from my pocket. I silently opened the voice memo app and hit record. Then I raised the camera and snapped a photo through the crack in the door. It captured Bianca holding my personal phone, my mother pointing at the screen, and my father nodding in approval. I watched as Bianca tapped the screen. "Done," she said. "50,000 sent to your account, Mom. You can wire it to Kyle." "Good," my mother sighed. "Now delete the transaction notification. She is so scatterbrained, she probably won't check her balance until January." I saved the recording and backed away toward the front door. My heart was pounding a rhythm of pure rage against my ribs, but my face was calm. I opened the front door and slammed it shut loudly, announcing my presence as if I had just come out of the bathroom or stepped outside for fresh air. "Hey, everyone," I called out, forcing a bright, confused smile onto my face. "Did I leave my phone in here?" The reaction was instantaneous. Bianca jumped so hard she nearly dropped my device. She quickly slid my phone under a napkin. My mother spun around, her face transforming from conspiratorial greed to a mask of welcoming warmth. "Zara, baby," she cooed, spreading her arms wide. "We were just talking about how much we love having you home." I walked into the kitchen. I looked at my father, who offered me a tight nod. I looked at Bianca, who was refusing to meet my eyes. And I looked at my mother, who was smiling at me while spending my money. "I love being home too, Mom," I said, walking over and retrieving my phone from under the napkin. I unlocked it and saw the battery was warm. I did not check the banking app, not yet. I needed them to think they had gotten away with it. So I looked at the people who shared my blood, the people who would sell me out for a rental car and a fake image, and I decided right then and there would be no Paris trip. There would be no forgiveness. Christmas was coming, and I was going to give them a gift they would never forget. Dinner that night was a masterclass in gaslighting. We sat around the heavy oak table that I had secretly paid off 3 years ago, listening to the clinking of silverware and the hollow sound of fake laughter. My mother, Patricia, piled pot roast onto my plate with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes, while my father, Desmond, sat at the head of the table, looking like a man who had just won the lottery. In a way, he had, since they had just drained my account of $50,000. Bianca was the star of the show. She sat there twirling her fork and checking her reflection in the back of a spoon. "Kyle is just killing it right now," she announced, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "He is being promoted to regional vice president next week. That is why we're renting the Porsche. He needs to look the part for his parents." I took a slow sip of water to hide my smirk. I knew for a fact that Kyle had been fired from his real estate firm 6 months ago for skimming petty cash. He was currently driving Uber Eats in a different county, so no one would recognize him. "That is wonderful, Bianca," I said, my voice steady. "I am so happy for you both." My father leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. He was fishing. He always fished when he smelled blood. "So, Zara, how was the consulting gig? You looked a little ragged when you walked in. Still chasing invoices?" I set my fork down and let my shoulders slump. I channeled every ounce of exhaustion I had ever felt. "It is bad, Dad," I lied. "I lost 2 major clients last month. The market is crashing. I'm actually thinking about selling my apartment and moving into a smaller place. I might even need to ask you guys for a loan soon." The relief on their faces was immediate and sickening. They did not want me to succeed. They wanted me to struggle because it made their theft feel like justice. If I was failing, I did not deserve the money anyway. "Well, you know we are tight right now," my mother said quickly, her hand instinctively touching the pocket where her phone was probably vibrating with transaction alerts. "But we will pray for you, honey." Then came the pivot. My father cleared his throat. "Speaking of assets, do you still have that digital safe in your condo? The one with the biometric lock? You know, with your memory issues, maybe you should give us the override code just in case something happens to you. We would hate for your assets to get lost in the system." I looked him dead in the eye. "There is nothing in there, Dad. I liquidated everything to pay rent." He sat back, satisfied. He thought I was broke. He thought I was vulnerable. And that was when my mother decided to go for the kill. She reached across the table and patted my hand. "You know, Zara, I hate to see you so down. I was thinking about the old traditions. Remember how Grandma used to bless our wallets to bring prosperity?" I nodded, playing along. "Well," she said, her eyes darted to my purse on the counter, "I saw you pull out that heavy black credit card earlier, the metal one. Why don't you let me hold on to that for the holidays? Just for a few days. I'll keep it in my Bible and pray over it to manifest abundance back into your life." The audacity was breathtaking. She wanted my Centurion card, the one with the invite-only access and the unlimited spending potential. She wanted to use it for the Christmas party to impress the Walkers. I paused just long enough to make them sweat. Then I smiled. "You know what, Mom?" I said, standing up and walking to my purse. "That is a beautiful idea. I could really use a blessing right now." I reached into my wallet and pulled out a sleek black metal card. It was heavy, it was cold, and it looked exactly like my primary card. "Here," I said, pressing it into her palm. "Keep it safe. Maybe it will bring us all exactly what we deserve." She clutched it like a holy relic, her eyes shining with greed. She had no idea that it was a supplementary card I kept for emergencies, and she definitely didn't know that while my hand was in my purse, I had used my phone to set the spending limit on that specific card to exactly 50 cents. Enjoy the blessing, Mom, I thought as I went back to my pot roast. You're going to need it. 2 days later, I was sitting in my real home, a glass-walled penthouse overlooking the Atlanta skyline, when the notification hit my phone. $50,000 successfully transferred. They had done it. They had actually drained the account I left vulnerable. I did not panic. I took a sip of my espresso and waited, because I knew the second shoe was about to drop. They had the money, which meant they no longer needed the donor. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her photo on my screen used to make me smile, but now it just looked like a warning label. I answered on the second ring, keeping my voice small and shaky as I swiped the green button. "Hello, Mom. Did you get the money?" I asked, knowing full well she had. "Oh, yes, sweetie, we got it." She breezed past the theft like it was a weather report. "Listen, Zara, we need to talk about the Christmas schedule." I leaned back in my leather chair and put my feet up on the desk. "Okay, what time should I come over on Christmas Eve?" I asked, playing the part of the oblivious daughter. There was a pause, the kind of heavy silence that screams rejection. "Well, that's the thing," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "We've been talking, me and your father and Bianca, and we think it would be better if you sat this one out." I let out a gasp, a theatrical, well-timed gasp. "What do you mean, Mom?" I asked, my voice trembling. "It's just that the Walkers are very particular people. Kyle's parents are used to a certain level of sophistication. And let's be honest, Zara, you can be a bit much. You're single, you're struggling, and you have that desperate energy lately. We just want a private, elegant atmosphere. We don't want you bringing down the mood with your financial problems." I squeezed my eyes shut, not to cry, but to focus on the game. "Please, Mom," I begged, injecting a wobble into my voice. "I already bought a dress. I just want to be with family. I won't say anything. I'll stay in the kitchen if you want. Please don't leave me alone on Christmas." "Absolutely not," she snapped, the amethyst evaporating instantly. "Don't be selfish, Zara. This is about Bianca and Kyle's future. This is about making a good impression. You don't fit the image we're trying to project. Go eat pizza or something. We'll send you a plate next week if there are leftovers. Now, goodbye. I have a party to plan." The line went dead. I held the phone to my ear for seconds just to be sure she was gone. Then I lowered it. I wiped a single tear from my cheek, not of sadness, but of pure adrenaline. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, staring out at the city I practically owned. The trembling in my hands stopped instantly. My breathing slowed. The mask dropped. I dialed a number I had on speed dial. It rang once. "Marcus here," a deep baritone voice answered. "My lawyer, my shark." "They took the bait, Marcus," I said, my voice cold. "The 50,000 is gone, and they just officially uninvited me from the property. They clearly stated they want nothing to do with me." I heard the sound of a keyboard clacking on his end. "Excellent," Marcus said. "Shall I freeze the accounts and file the injunction now?" "No," I said, watching a hawk circle the building below. "Not yet. If we stop them now, it's just a misunderstanding. It's just a family dispute. I need them to spend it, Marcus. I need them to use that money to put deposits on venues and cars that they can't afford. I need them to cross the line from borrowing to grand larceny. Let the transaction clear. Let them feel rich for 48 hours. When the total spent hits the felony threshold, then we strike." I drove my G-Wagon out of the city, leaving the humidity of Atlanta behind for the crisp, biting air of the Colorado mountains. The drive to Aspen was long but necessary. It gave me time to think, time to breathe, and time to transition from the role of the downtrodden daughter back into my true self. When I finally pulled into the private driveway of my estate, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the snow-capped peaks. This was my sanctuary, my $3 million villa of glass and steel perched on the side of a mountain, bought 2 years ago when a risky bet on a tech startup paid off 10 times over, followed by a perfectly timed exit from the crypto market. My family thought I was living in a shoebox apartment because I never corrected them. They never asked to visit, so they never knew that my weekend work trips were actually escapes to this paradise. I walked inside, inhaling the scent of cedar and expensive leather. I dropped my bag on the heated stone floor and walked to the wall of windows. Below me, the lights of Aspen twinkled like diamonds. This was the life I had built. This was the success I had earned, and for the next few days, it would be the stage for my masterpiece. I did not come here just to hide. I came here to host. I pulled out my phone and opened the group chat with my event planner. It was time to execute. I ordered the best private chefs from the local Michelin star restaurants, cases of vintage champagne that cost more than my father's car, and a jazz band that usually only played for celebrities. I invited my business partners, my mentors, and the few friends who knew the real me. I even sent a digital invite to Kyle's former boss, a man who despised thieves as much as I did. While I was curating a menu of caviar and truffles, my phone buzzed with notifications from my bank. I had set up a special alert system with Marcus. Every time Bianca or Kyle swiped that card, I got a ping, and they were busy. Ping! $5,000 to a luxury car rental agency in Atlanta, non-refundable. Ping! $8,000 to a high-end catering company, non-refundable. Ping! $3,000 for a DJ and lighting setup, non-refundable. They were burning through the $50,000 like it was infinite paper. They were booking things they could never afford, locking themselves into contracts they could not honor without my money. They were building a castle on a foundation of sand, and they had no idea the tide was coming in. I poured myself a glass of wine and watched the snowfall. It was almost too easy. They were so desperate to look rich that they were abandoning all common sense. They were not saving a penny for emergencies or debts. They were spending every cent on image. Then my personal phone rang. It was Aunt May. She was my father's sister and the only person in that family with a spine. She knew about my success because she was the only one who ever bothered to ask me meaningful questions. "Zara, honey, you need to hear this," May whispered, her voice trembling with anger. "I am in the kitchen pretending to make tea. Your parents and the Walkers are in the living room." "What are they saying, May?" I asked, leaning against the granite island. "They are showing the Walkers pictures," May said. "Pictures of your villa, the one in Aspen. You must have left a brochure or a photo on your tablet because they have them." I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the snow outside. "And what are they saying about it?" "Bianca is claiming she bought it," May hissed. "She is telling Kyle's parents that her influencer career took off and she bought a winter estate in Colorado. She says it's her surprise gift to the family. They're planning to fly the Walkers and the whole family out there on the 26th. They think they are coming to stay in your house, Zara." I gripped the stem of my wine glass so hard I thought it might shatter. The audacity was beyond anything I had anticipated. They were not just stealing my cash, they were appropriating my entire life. They were going to show up at my doorstep with my brother-in-law's parents, expecting to walk into my home and claim it as their own. "Let them come," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Zara, are you sure?" May asked. "That could get ugly." "Let them come, May," I repeated. "Do not warn them. Do not say a word. If they want to claim they own my house, let them drive all the way here to prove it." I hung up the phone and looked out at the dark driveway. The game had just changed. This was no longer just about a party or a credit card. This was an invasion, and I would be ready. I sat at the heavy mahogany desk in my study, holding a stack of invitations that weighed more than a brick. These were not paper. They were gold-plated steel engraved with laser precision and wrapped in crushed velvet. I was not just throwing a party. I was making a statement. I addressed the first one to Elena, the venture capitalist who had helped me close my first 7-figure deal. The second went to Marcus, my shark of a lawyer, who would be attending not just as a guest, but as a witness to the carnage. But the most important invitation was the last one. I addressed it to Mr. Sterling. He was the owner of the boutique real estate firm where Kyle used to work. He was the man who fired Kyle because he had stolen petty cash and attempted to solicit bribes from clients. I slipped the heavy card into its envelope, knowing that Mr. Sterling despised thieves as much as I did. He would not miss the chance to see justice served, especially when it came with a glass of vintage Dom Perignon. I called a private courier service to ensure the invites were delivered by hand within the hour. While I was securing the attendance of Atlanta's actual elite, my mother was busy constructing her house of cards back home. Aunt May texted me updates throughout the day, painting a picture of desperate vanity that was almost painful to read. Patricia had hired a staging company to replace their perfectly good furniture with rented designer pieces. She wanted the house to look like a magazine spread for the walkers. She was running around the neighborhood knocking on doors just to casually mention that her son-in-law was renting a Porsche and taking them to Aspen. She told Mrs. Johnson next door that Kyle was closing million-dollar deals daily. It was pathetic. They were spending money they stole from me to impress people who didn't care about them, all to maintain a lie that was about to collapse. My phone kept buzzing with notifications from the black card I had given my mother. A $4,000 charge for exotic flowers, $2,000 for a custom ice sculpture. They were not just spending the $50,000 transfer, they were now dipping into the credit line of the card, believing it was a bottomless pit of abundance. I let every transaction go through. Every swipe was another nail in their coffin. Every dollar spent was another piece of evidence for the grand larceny charge Marcus was preparing. They were digging a hole so deep they would never claim out of it. And they were doing it with a smile on their faces. Then came the notification that made my blood run cold and hot all at once. It was an Instagram alert. Kyle had posted a story. I opened the app, my thumb hovering over the screen. The video was shaky, filmed in my parents' living room, which was now filled with the rented white leather furniture. Kyle was wearing a suit that looked expensive but fit poorly, likely because he had not had time to get it tailored. He was standing in front of a mirror, holding a thick stack of cash. My cash, the $50,000 they had transferred to Bianca's account, which they had apparently withdrawn in fresh bills to flaunt before spending. Bianca was in the background, laughing and throwing rose petals in the air like they were in a music video. Kyle looked into the camera, his face flushed with unearned pride and arrogance. He fanned himself with the money and winked. The caption flashed across the screen in bold neon letters. Hustle hard, building the empire one brick at a time. I stared at the screen. He was bragging. He was publicly flaunting the money he had stolen from his sister-in-law, pretending it was the fruit of his own labor. He was tagging his friends, tagging his parents, tagging Bianca. He was so drunk on the illusion of wealth that he forgot that the internet is forever. I did not get angry. I got busy. I took a screenshot. Then I screen recorded the entire video, ensuring I captured the date, time, and his handle. I saved it to 3 different cloud drives and emailed a copy to Marcus. "You want to hustle, Kyle?" I whispered to the empty room. "Okay, let us see how hard you hustle when you are explaining to a judge why you are holding my money in a house filled with goods bought with my credit card." The trap was set. The cheese was taken, and the rat was busy taking selfies. All I had to do now was wait for the snap. I looked like a woman who had lost everything, sitting alone in the dark while the world celebrated without her. I uploaded it to Instagram with a caption that I had drafted the night before. "Another Christmas alone, wishing things were different. Peace and prosperity to everyone else, even if I cannot find it myself." I hit post and waited. The bait was in the water. It took less than 5 minutes for the shark to bite. My phone pinged with a text message from Bianca. I opened it and read the words that would seal her fate. A screenshot of my post followed by a message that dripped with cruelty. "Serves you right, old maid," she wrote. "Maybe if you weren't so bitter and cheap, you would have a husband and a family who actually wanted you around. Don't bother calling us today. We're busy with the walkers, and we don't need your toxic energy ruining the vibe. Enjoy your pizza." I stared at the screen. Old maid. Toxic energy. My own sister. The girl whose tuition I had secretly paid. The girl whose credit card debt I had wiped clear 2 years ago without her knowing, was laughing at my manufactured misery while preparing to host a party funded entirely by my stolen money. I did not feel hurt. I felt a cold, sharp clarity. They were not just greedy. They were malicious. They enjoyed my pain. They thrived on my exclusion. I switched apps to check the security cameras I had installed at my parents' house years ago, ostensibly for their safety, but now serving a much darker purpose. The feed showed a hive of activity. My mother was shouting instructions at a team of florists arranging white roses that cost $5 a stem. My father was adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror, practicing his benevolent patriarch smile. Kyle was out on the driveway, wiping a smudge off the hood of the rented Porsche, his chest puffed out like a peacock. They looked so happy. They looked so secure. They had the food, the decorations, the cars, and the guests, all secured with a plastic card that was currently sitting in my mother's purse. They thought they had won. They thought the money was theirs now. They thought I was defeated, huddled in a corner hundreds of miles away. It was noon. The caterers were scheduled to arrive at 4 to set up the main course. The balance for the food, the staff, and the rentals was due upon arrival, thousands of dollars that they did not have in cash. I closed the camera app and opened my contacts. I scrolled down to the number for the fraud department of my bank. My private banker, Charles, picked up on the first ring. "Good afternoon, Miss Zara," Charles said, his voice professional and warm. "Merry Christmas Eve. How can I help you?" "Hello, Charles," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "I need to report some suspicious activity on my accounts." "Oh, dear," Charles sounded concerned. "Which account, ma'am?" "All of them," I said, staring into the fire. "Specifically, the supplementary black card ending in 4098 and the primary checking account linked to it. I have reason to believe my financial data has been compromised. I suspect identity theft and unauthorized high-value transactions." I waited a beat, letting the weight of the accusations settle in. "I want you to activate a Level 1 fraud alert," I commanded. "Freeze everything, Charles. Lock the cards. Revoke the authorizations for any pending charges. Decline any transaction that attempts to go through from this second forward. And Charles, if anyone calls trying to unblock it, you tell them that the account is under federal investigation for grand larceny." "Consider it done, Miss Zara," Charles said, the typing on his end sounding like gunfire. "All accounts are frozen effective immediately. Is there anything else?" "No, Charles," I said. A small smile finally touched my lips. "That will be all." I hung up the phone. The trap was sprung. The cage door had slammed shut. In 4 hours, the bill would come due, and for the first time in their lives, my family would have to pay. They were carrying the lobster thermidor, the Wagyu beef sliders, and the vintage wines that Bianca had ordered with such arrogant confidence. I watched as my mother, Patricia, fluttered around the front porch, directing the staff like she was royalty. She was wearing a red silk dress that I knew cost $2,000 because I had seen the charge alert pop up on my phone yesterday, right before I froze the accounts. She looked radiant. She looked triumphant. She had no idea she was about to face the firing squad. The head of the catering team, a tall man with a clipboard and a no-nonsense expression, signaled for his staff to pause. He walked up to Bianca, who was standing by the door, holding the black metal card I had given my mother. She looked every bit the part of the spoiled heiress, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. "We are ready to set up the carving station, ma'am," the caterer said, his voice carrying clearly over the audio feed. "We just need to process the remaining balance of $15,000 before we unseal the containers. Company policy for holiday events." "Of course," Bianca said, her voice dripping with condescension. She handed him the heavy black card with a flourish. "Just run it and add a 20% tip for yourself." I leaned closer to my screen, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm of anticipation. This was it, the moment the guillotine dropped. The caterer inserted the chip into his portable reader. The little machine whirred. There was a pause, a long, agonizing pause where the world seemed to hold its breath. Beep. The sound was sharp and final. The caterer frowned and looked at the screen. "I am sorry, ma'am," he said politely. "It says declined." Bianca laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound that grated on my ears. "That is impossible," she said, snatching the card back and wiping the chip on her dress. "It is a Centurion card. It does not have a limit. Try it again. You probably lost the signal." The caterer patiently took the card back and inserted it again. He waited. Beep. Declined. Refer to issuer. The smile slid off my mother's face like melting wax. Bianca's hand started to tremble. "Here, use this one," she said, pulling out her phone to use Apple Pay, which was linked to the checking account they had drained. Beep. Declined. "Try this one," she said, pulling a different card from her purse, one that was authorized as an emergency backup on my account. Beep. Declined. Fraud alert. The air on the porch grew heavy and cold. The catering staff, who had been holding heavy silver trays of food, began to shift their weight, looking at each other with raised eyebrows. Inside the house, I could see the Walkers, Kyle's parents, standing near the window watching the commotion. Kyle was standing next to Bianca, his face rapidly losing its color. "Is there a problem?" the caterer asked, his tone shifting from service professional to debt collector. "We have 3 other events tonight, ma'am. If payment cannot be processed immediately, we will have to leave." "It is the bank's fault," Bianca shrieked, her voice cracking. "They must have flagged it because of the holiday spending. Kyle, do something." Kyle stepped forward, puffing out his chest in a pathetic attempt at intimidation. "Look, buddy, do you know who we are? My wife is good for it. Just set up the food and we will write you a check once the banks reopen." The caterer did not even blink. He looked at Kyle's ill-fitting suit and the sweat beading on his forehead. "Sir, we do not accept checks on holidays, and we certainly do not extend credit to declined accounts. I need $15,000 right now." Kyle patted his pockets as if he might magically find 15 grand in his jacket. He pulled out a leather wallet and opened it. It was empty, save for a few maxed-out personal cards and a driver's license. He looked at Bianca. She looked at my mother. My mother looked at the ground. "You have 5 minutes," the caterer said, checking his watch. "Cash or valid card, or my team packs up and leaves. And since the deposit was non-refundable, you will lose that too." I watched Kyle freeze. He did not have 5 minutes. He did not have $5. The Porsche in the driveway was a rental, the suit was on credit, and the feast that was supposed to cement his status as the golden son-in-law was about to drive away in a white van, leaving them with nothing but empty tables and hungry, judging guests. While my mother was watching her social standing evaporate on a humid porch in Atlanta, I was stepping into a world of pure, unadulterated opulence, 1,000 miles away. The sun had dipped behind the Rockies, painting the sky in shades of violet and indigo that matched the mood lighting inside my villa perfectly. I had traded the gray blanket and the pathetic act for a custom gown made of shimmering silver silk that moved like liquid moonlight around my ankles. I walked down the floating glass staircase, the sound of a live jazz quartet drifting up from the great room. They were playing a smooth rendition of a holiday classic, the saxophone notes hanging in the air like expensive smoke. My guests had arrived, and the atmosphere was electric with the hum of genuine success. The room was filled with the kind of people my parents spent their whole lives trying to impress, but never could. Elena was laughing near the massive stone fireplace, holding a crystal flute of vintage Krug. Marcus was deep in conversation with a tech CEO I had invited, discussing mergers and acquisitions with the casual ease of men who move markets. And there, standing by the 12-foot towering Christmas tree adorned with real Swarovski crystals, was Mr. Sterling. He looked formidable, holding a tumbler of aged scotch. I approached him, and he raised his glass with a knowing glint in his eye. "To justice," he said with a wink, "and to excellent timing." We clinked glasses, the crystals singing a clear, high note that felt like victory. The air smelled of cedar, roasting chestnuts, and expensive perfume. Waiters in white jackets moved silently through the crowd, offering trays of caviar blinis and truffle-infused hors d'oeuvres. In the center of the room, a champagne tower stood 5 feet tall, the golden liquid cascading down the pyramid of glasses in a mesmerizing display of excess. This was not just a party, it was a coronation. Then the front door opened and Aunt May walked in, bundled in a faux fur coat, shaking snow from her boots. She stopped dead in her tracks, her mouth falling open as she took in the soaring ceilings, the floor-to-ceiling windows revealing the snowy peaks, and the sheer scale of my success. Lord have mercy, Zara. You did not just buy a house, you bought a palace. I hugged her tight, inhaling the familiar scent of her peppermint tea and comfort. Welcome home, Aunt May, I whispered, feeling a true smile break across my face for the first time in weeks. She pulled back, her eyes dancing with mischief. The family group chat is silent, which means the bomb has detonated. They are probably staring at that caterer like he's the Grim Reaper. We need to show them what they're missing. She pulled out her phone. I'm going live, baby. The world needs to see this. May hit the button and started broadcasting to Facebook and Instagram simultaneously. She swept the camera around the room, capturing the jazz band, the private chefs plating Wagyu beef on slate tiles, and the champagne tower that glowed under the chandelier. Then she turned the lens on me. I did not hide. I did not look sad. I looked directly into the camera, raised my glass, and smiled a smile that was sharp enough to cut glass. "Merry Christmas from Aspen," I said, my voice smooth and rich. Living my best life with the people who matter. Within minutes, the notifications started rolling in. May has a lot of mutual friends with my mother and Bianca. The view count spiked rapidly. Hearts and shocked emojis floated up the screen in a stream of digital validation. Then the comments started, and they were brutal. I saw names I recognized. Bianca's influencer friends, the girls she tried so hard to impress. "Wait, isn't that Zara?" one comment read. "Bianca just posted a story saying her sister was crying in a studio apartment eating frozen pizza." Another wrote, Bianca told us she bought this villa. She said it was her property. Why is Zara hosting the party?" And then the dagger that I knew would pierce Bianca's soul. One of her biggest rivals, a girl she hated, commented, "Yo, Bianca, why are you lying? Your sister is literally dripping in diamonds in a mansion while you were posting rental cars in Atlanta. This is embarrassing." Tagging her so she could see what real money looks like. The comments flooded in, tagging Bianca over and over again, demanding answers, asking why she lied, asking why she was not at her own alleged house. The live stream was going viral in our local circle. Everyone was seeing the truth. While they were standing in the cold with declined cards, I was being crowned the Queen of Aspen. The narrative had flipped, and the internet was eating it up. Back in Atlanta, the scene was shifting from tragedy to farce. Through the high-definition lens of my security cameras, I watched a sleek silver Mercedes-Benz glide up the driveway. It was the Walkers, Kyle's parents. They were old-money, white Southern aristocracy, the kind of people who judged you by your shoes before they even looked at your face. They stepped out of the car looking immaculate in cashmere coats and polished leather boots, expecting a winter wonderland gala. Instead, they walked into a crime scene of social suicide. The white catering van was already gone, leaving behind nothing but tire tracks on the pavement and a lingering smell of exhaust. The porch where the carving station was supposed to be was empty. The ice sculpture that had been delivered earlier had been unceremoniously dumped on the lawn by the angry delivery crew when the payment was reversed, and it was currently melting into a sad puddle near the azaleas. I watched as my mother, Patricia, opened the front door before they could even ring the bell. She was smiling that wide, frantic smile she used when she was terrified. Her face was flushed and her hands were shaking as she ushered them inside. "Welcome, welcome," she chirped, her voice an octave too high. "Come in out of the cold. We are just having a few technical difficulties, but everything is under control." The Walkers stepped into the foyer and stopped. The house was dim. Not mood lighting dim, but utility shut-off notice dim. The lights in the chandelier flickered ominously, then buzzed and dimmed to a brown glow before flickering back up. It was the result of me canceling the automatic bill pay 3 months ago. I had been paying their utilities for years without them knowing, and when I stopped, the notices had gone to an email address they never checked. Today, of all days, the power company had decided to throttle the service due to non-payment. Mrs. Walker looked around, clutching her purse tighter. "It is very dark in here, Patricia," she said, her nose wrinkling slightly. "And where is the music? I thought Kyle said you hired a string quartet." "Oh, they're just on a break," Bianca lied, stepping forward. She looked like a deer in headlights. Her dress was beautiful, but her eyes were darting around the room, looking for an exit that did not exist. "And the food?" Mr. Walker asked, his voice booming in the quiet hallway. "I am starving. Kyle told us there would be lobster. I do not see any lobster." He was right. The dining room table was set with the rental china that was likely about to be repossessed, but there was not a scrap of food on it. No appetizers, no drinks, no lobster. The kitchen island was barren, save for a few bags of store-bought chips that Kyle must have dug out of the pantry in a panic. "We had a slight issue with the vendors," my mother stammered, her composure cracking. "A banking error. You know how it is with these holiday transactions. The system gets overloaded. They had to go back to the warehouse to reset the card reader. They'll be back any minute." "A banking error," Mr. Walker repeated. He did not look convinced. He looked around the dim house, at the melting ice outside, at the empty table, and then he looked at his son. Kyle was shrinking against the wall, trying to blend into the wallpaper. Mr. Walker turned his cold blue eyes back at my mother. "A banking error usually implies there is money in the bank to begin with, Patricia," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Kyle told us this family was wealthy. He told us you were partners in a multi-million-dollar firm. He told us you were millionaires. Looking around this empty, dark house, I'm starting to wonder if my son is a liar or if you were all just frauds." The silence that followed was absolute. My mother gasped as if she had been slapped. Bianca let out a small sob. Kyle looked like he was about to vomit. And me, watching from my mountain fortress, I took a sip of champagne. The humiliation was complete. They were stripped bare, exposed for exactly what they were, and the night was only just beginning. Back in the villa, the party was reaching a crescendo of elegance. The jazz band had switched to an upbeat tempo, and laughter filled the room as guests mingled under the crystal chandeliers. I was standing near the bar, holding court with a group of investors who were hanging on to my every word about market trends. But my attention was split on the small side table next to my untouched drink. My phone was vibrating with the relentless intensity of a jackhammer. It started with Bianca. One call, then 2, then 10, then 50, then 500. Then her name flashed across the screen over and over again, a desperate plea from a drowning woman. Then came my mother, 20 calls in 5 minutes, then my father, then even Kyle, who had never called me in his life. The screen lit up like a strobe light, the names cycling in a frantic loop of panic. I did not answer. I did not decline. I simply let it ring. I picked up my phone, not to answer, but to record. I opened the camera app and focused on the screen, capturing the incoming call from Mom, followed immediately by one from Bianca. I panned the camera up to catch the reflection of the party in the background, the champagne flowing, the guests laughing, the sheer undeniable wealth surrounding me. I posted the video to my Instagram story. No sound, just the visual of their desperation set against the backdrop of my triumph. I edited the caption of my earlier post, the one where I looked sad and lonely. I deleted the part about wishing things were different. Instead, I typed, "Thank you to the people who walked out of my life. You made room for the people who actually matter. And you reminded me just how rich I really am." The reaction was instantaneous. My phone buzzed with notifications from friends, followers, and yes, even Bianca's friends who were watching the drama unfold in real time. They saw the calls, they saw the party, they put 2 and 2 together. The girl who was supposed to be crying over pizza was ignoring the family who had abandoned her while throwing the event of the season. Back in Atlanta, the panic was turning into terror. Through the security feed, I could see the unraveling. The Walkers had retreated to the living room, sitting on the edge of the rented sofa, looking like they were waiting for a bus in a bad neighborhood. My mother, Patricia, was in the kitchen, frantically whispering into her phone, leaving me yet another voicemail. "Sarah, please pick up," she hissed, her voice trembling. "This is not funny. The Walkers are here, the food is gone, the lights are flickering. You have to unlock the card. Just unlock it for 1 hour. We will pay you back, I swear. Just pick up the phone." I watched her hang up and immediately dial again. She looked aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Her perfect hair was fraying at the edges, her makeup settling into the lines of worry on her face. In the hallway, Bianca had cornered Kyle. She was grabbing his lapels, shaking him. "Why are they declining?" she screamed, her voice shrill with hysteria. "You said you handled the finances. You said you had investments. Why is my sister's card the only thing keeping us afloat? Why don't you have any money, Kyle?" Kyle looked like a cornered rat. His eyes were wild, darting around the room as if looking for an escape route. He pulled Bianca close, his voice a harsh whisper that the high-gain microphone on the security camera picked up clearly. "Because I'm broke, Bianca," he hissed. "I have been broke for months. I lost the job, I lost the savings. I owe people money, Bianca. Bad people." Bianca stopped shaking him. She stared at him, her mouth open in horror. "What do you mean, bad people?" "I mean loan sharks," Kyle said, tears of fear welling in his eyes. "I borrowed 50 grand from a guy in Buckhead to pay for the ring and the lease on the apartment. I thought the promotion would come through and I could pay him back, but it didn't. And now he is texting me. He says if I don't have the interest payment by midnight, he's going to come collect, and he doesn't take credit cards." Bianca backed away from him, her hands covering her mouth. "You lied to me," she whispered. "You lied about everything." "I need that money from Zara," Kyle pleaded, grabbing her arm. "I need you to get her to unlock that account. If she doesn't transfer the cash back, I'm a dead man. Bianca, do you hear me? They will kill me." I watched the color drain from Bianca's face. She looked at her husband, the man she thought was her ticket to the high life, and saw him for what he was. A fraud, a failure, a liability. And in that moment, she realized the sister she had knocked, the sister she had banned, the sister she had stolen from, was the only person on earth who could save them. And I wasn't picking up the phone. Christmas morning broke over the mountains with a blinding brilliance, the sun reflecting off the fresh snow in a way that made the whole world look clean and new. I stood on my balcony, wrapped in a cashmere robe, sipping a cup of Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee and breathing in the silence. It was the most peaceful morning of my life. There was no screaming, no passive-aggressive comments about my marital status, and no one asking to borrow money. Inside, my staff was preparing a brunch that featured lobster benedict and endless mimosas. I had won. But as I unlocked my phone, I realized the game was not quite over. The rats were not just trapped. They were coming for the exterminator. Aunt May was sitting at the kitchen island, scrolling through her iPad with a look of disbelief on her face. "You are not going to believe this, Zara," she said, shaking her head. "They are coming here. They took a red-eye flight into Denver using Mr. Walker's miles because all of Kyle's cards were declined. They rented a large SUV and they are driving up the mountain right now. They saw the location tag on my live stream." I took a slow sip of coffee. "Let them come," I said calmly. "They're driving into a blizzard with no money and no plan. This should be interesting." The drive from Denver to Aspen is treacherous in the winter, even for experienced drivers. For a car full of panicked, furious people from Atlanta, it must have been a nightmare. I could only imagine the atmosphere inside that vehicle. My mother, Patricia, probably clutching her pearls and praying loudly, while my father, Desmond, yelled about disrespect. Bianca was likely trying to spin a new web of lies, telling the Walkers that I had stolen the keys to her villa, or that I was house-sitting and refused to leave, and poor, broke Kyle was behind the wheel, driving towards a destiny he could not afford. The roads were icy and the wind was picking up, whipping the snow into a frenzy that reduced visibility to near zero. I monitored their progress through the GPS tracker on my old phone, which I knew my mother still had in her purse. They were making slow time, crawling up the winding mountain passes. Then the dot on the map stopped. It stopped in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest service station, on a stretch of road known for spotty cell service and freezing temperatures. I watched the dot for 10 minutes. It did not move. An hour later, my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize. I answered it, putting it on speaker so May could hear. "Hello, is this Zara Wilson?" "This is she," I replied. "Ma'am, this is Jim from Jim's Towing and Recovery," the voice said. I have a group of folks out here on Highway 82. Their SUV overheated and slid into a snowbank. They're claiming they're your family." I leaned against the counter, a smile playing on my lips. "Are they okay, Jim?" "Physically, they're fine," he said, sounding annoyed. "But they are freezing, and they are yelling a lot. The driver, a guy named Kyle, tried to pay me for the tow and the service call. He handed me 3 different credit cards. Every single one of them declined." I let out a soft laugh. "Is that so?" "Yes, ma'am," Jim continued. "He tried to tell me to invoice his company, but I don't work on credit. Then the older gentleman with them started shouting about fraud. It is a mess out here. They gave me your number, said you would authorize the payment. It is $500 to get them out and towed to the nearest shop." I looked at May. She was covering her mouth to keep from laughing. "I am sorry, Jim," I said, my voice cool and detached. "I do not know a Kyle, and I certainly did not authorize any charges. If they cannot pay you, I suggest you leave them there. Or maybe they can walk. It is only another 20 miles. "But ma'am, they have elderly people in the car," Jim protested, though he sounded less concerned about their safety and more concerned about his wasted time. "That sounds like a personal problem, Jim," I said. "I am enjoying my Christmas morning. Please do not call this number again." I hung up. Back on the mountain, the reality of their situation was crashing down on them harder than the snow. Kyle was standing on the side of the road, his breath coming in white puffs of panic. He had tried to play the big shot. He had tried to be the man who could handle anything. But now, stripped of my money and my credit, he was just a guy with bad credit and a broken rental car. The Walkers were watching him. Mr. Walker, wrapped in his expensive coat, looked at his son-in-law with a mixture of disgust and realization. He had heard the cards decline. He had seen the tow truck driver shake his head. The illusion of the wealthy, successful son-in-law had vanished, leaving behind a shivering fraud who could not even afford a tow. Inside the car, Bianca was likely screaming, blaming everyone but herself. My parents were probably realizing that the cold bite of winter was nothing compared to the cold shoulder of the daughter they had scorned. They were stuck. They were cold, and for the first time in their lives, they were completely and utterly broke. I poured myself another mimosa. The show was getting good. They would find a way eventually. Mr. Walker would likely pull out his own wallet, humiliated that he had to rescue the people who were supposed to be impressing him. But the damage was done. The facade was shattered on the side of an icy highway. And when they finally did arrive at my gates, they would not be coming as conquerors. They would be coming as beggars. It was high noon when the battered rental SUV finally crawled up the heated driveway of my Aspen estate. They looked like refugees from a failed polar expedition. My father, Desmond, was the first to stumble out of the vehicle. His expensive suit was wrinkled and stained with road slush. My mother, Patricia, followed, her hair a wind-blown disaster, her designer heels completely ruined by the snow she had been forced to stand in on the side of the highway. Bianca and Kyle emerged from the backseat, looking less like a power couple and more like 2 teenagers who had been grounded for life. And then there were the Walkers. Mr. and Mrs. Walker stepped last, their faces set in grim lines of absolute judgment. They were not angry, they were appalled. They had expected a luxury holiday with a wealthy family, and instead they had spent Christmas morning shivering in a tow truck with a group of grifters. I watched it all from the comfort of my library, my hand resting on a mug of hot cocoa. The security monitors gave me a front-row seat to their humiliation. As they looked up at the villa, I saw the collective gasp ripple through the group. This was not a house, it was a statement. The 3-story glass facade reflected the mountains and the sky, making the structure look like it was carved from ice and money. It was imposing, it was intimidating, and it was undeniably expensive. Bianca stared at the house, her mouth hanging open. She had lied to everyone saying she bought a villa, but she had never seen this place in person. She had only seen the photos on my tablet. Now, faced with the reality of it, the sheer scale of the lie she had told seemed to crush her. She looked at Kyle, and I saw the fear in her eyes. She knew she could never afford this. She knew that everyone else was about to realize it too. But my father did not feel shame. He felt rage. He marched up the front steps, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. He did not see a home. He saw a fortress that he had been locked out of. He saw his authority being challenged, and that was the one thing Desmond Wilson could not abide. He raised his fist and hammered on the massive oak door. The sound echoed through the entryway, booming like a cannon shot. "Open this door," he screamed, his voice cracking with exhaustion and fury. "Open this door right now, Zara. I know you are in there, you ungrateful child. How dare you lock the cards? How dare you leave your family stranded in the snow?" My mother joined him, her voice shrill and desperate. "Zara, honey, please let us in. It's freezing out here. We're your parents. You cannot do this to us. Think of what the neighbors will say." I shook my head. Even now, freezing in disgrace, she was worried about the neighbors. She was worried about appearances. Desmond pounded again, harder this time. "You are going to pay for this. You are going to apologize to Kyle and Bianca, and you are going to fix this financial mess you caused. Do you hear me? I am your father, and I command you to open this door." The Walkers stood back by the car, watching the spectacle with horror. This was the family their son had married into. This screaming, pounding mob was the lineage they had joined. I watched Mr. Walker pull out his phone, likely checking for the earliest flight back to civilization. I picked up my walkie-talkie and pressed the button. "Send him out," I said. The pounding stopped abruptly as the heavy front door swung open, silent on its well-oiled hinges. My father stumbled forward, expecting resistance and finding none. He opened his mouth to scream another insult, but the words died in his throat. Standing at the doorway was not his daughter. It was not a cowering girl begging for forgiveness. It was Titus, my head of security. Titus stood 6'5" tall and was built like a tank. He wore a black suit that cost more than my father's car, and he wore an earpiece that whispered of professionalism and threat. He filled the doorframe, blocking any view of the interior, blocking any warmth from escaping, blocking my father from the object of his rage. Titus looked at my father, his face an impassive mask of stone. He did not blink, he did not smile, he simply crossed his massive arms across his chest and stared. My father took a step back, his bluster deflating instantly in the face of physical superiority. "Who are you?" he stammered. "Where is my daughter? Get out of my way." Titus did not move. His voice was a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate the very air on the porch. "This is a private residence, sir," Titus said, his tone polite but final. "The owner is not receiving unexpected visitors. Do you have an appointment?" My father sputtered. "Appointment? I am her father. I do not need an appointment. I demand to see her." Titus tilted his head slightly, as if listening to a distant sound. "I have been instructed to inform you that the owner does not know you, and unless you have a scheduled meeting, I am going to ask you to remove your vehicle from the property. You are trespassing." The word hung in the cold air. Trespassing. My father looked at my mother. He looked at the Walkers. He looked at the massive man blocking his path. And for the first time, he realized that the rules had changed. He was no longer the king of the castle. He was just a noisy intruder on someone else's land. Titus pressed his finger to his earpiece, listening to my command before stepping aside. The heavy oak doors swung open, and the warmth of the villa hit them like a physical wall. They stumbled into the grand foyer, dripping gray slush onto the imported Italian marble floors. I watched them from my position in the sunken living room, seated in a high-backed red velvet armchair that looked less like furniture and more like a throne. To my right sat Marcus, my shark of a lawyer, in an impeccable three-piece suit, holding a thick file of evidence on his lap. To my left stood Sheriff Miller, in full uniform, his hand resting casually near his belt, a silent and imposing reminder of the law. My family froze in the entryway. The sheer scale of the room silenced them instantly. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed the snow-capped mountains like a living painting. The air smelled of expensive cedar and victory. The The walkers looked around, their eyes wide, taking in the original art on the walls, the custom furniture, and the undeniable atmosphere of extreme wealth. Mr. Walker looked at Bianca, then at me, and I saw the realization hit him. He looked at the daughter-in-law who claimed to own this place, standing, shivering in a cheap coat, and then at the woman sitting on the throne. The math finally added up in his head. Bianca was shaking, but I do not think it was from the cold. She saw the sheriff. She saw the file in Marcus's hand. She tried to hide behind Kyle, but there was nowhere to hide. Kyle looked like he was about to faint, his eyes darting frantically between the exits and the police officer. My father, Desmond, recovered first. He marched down the few steps into the living area, his boots leaving muddy prints on the white wool rug. "Who are these people, Zara?" he demanded, pointing a trembling finger at my guests. "Why is there a police officer in my house?" "This is not your house, Dad," I said, my voice calm and projecting clearly across the vast room. "This is my house, and these are my associates." My mother, Patricia, let out a screech that sounded like a wounded animal. She pushed past my father, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She did not see the sheriff. She did not see the lawyer. She only saw the daughter she had thrown away sitting in the lap of luxury while she had spent the morning freezing in a tow truck. "You did this," she screamed, rushing toward me. "You ungrateful, spiteful little witch. You ruined Christmas. You ruined everything. We are your parents. How dare you lock us out? How dare you humiliate us?" She lunged at me, her hand raised to strike. She wanted to slap the success right off my face. She wanted to beat me back into submission, back into the small, quiet girl who paid the bills and kept her mouth shut. But she never got close. Titus moved with a speed that defied his size. He stepped between us, catching her wrist in midair. He did not hurt her, but he stopped her cold. He held her arm there, suspended, a barrier of flesh and bone between her rage and my peace. My mother gasped, struggling against his grip, but she was powerless. She looked at me, her eyes wide with shock. She had never been stopped before. She had never been told no. "Release her, Titus," I said softly. Titus let go, and my mother stumbled back, fallen onto one of the guest sofas. She looked small. She looked defeated. I leaned forward in my red chair, interlacing my fingers. The room was silent. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the heavy breathing of my family. "Sit down," I commanded, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. "All of you, sit down." They obeyed. Even my father sank onto a chair, his bluster deflating under the weight of the sheriff's stare. The walkers sat on the edge of a love seat, distancing themselves from my family as if failure was contagious. Bianca and Kyle huddled together on an ottoman, looking like two children waiting for the principal. I looked at them, the people who raised me, the sister I protected, the strangers I tried to impress. "You wanted a family gathering," I said, my eyes locking with my mother's. "You wanted to be together for Christmas. Well, here we are, but we are not here to celebrate. We are here to settle the score." I nodded to Marcus. He opened the file, the sound of paper sliding against paper loud in the quiet room. "It is time to pay the bill." Marcus stood up from his leather chair, moving with the slow, deliberate grace of a predator who knows the prey has nowhere to run. He did not shout. He did not wave papers around. He simply picked up a small silver remote control from the coffee table and pointed it at the hidden surround sound system that cost more than my parents' house. "Before we discuss the trespassing charges, allow me to refresh your memories regarding the origin of the funds you have been spending so freely." My mother opened her mouth to protest, but the sound of her own voice booming from the speakers cut her off. The audio was crystal clear, amplified to concert hall quality. "She is so stupid," Bianca's recorded voice sneered, echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Bianca flinched as if she had been struck, physically shrinking back against the ottoman. Kyle looked at the floor, wishing he could dissolve into the carpet. Then came my mother's voice, eager and greedy. Just transfer the $50,000. Do it now before she comes back. Kyle needs that deposit for the Porsche rental by tonight. We have to impress his parents. The Walkers are coming, and we cannot look like paupers." I watched Mr. and Mrs. Walker stiffen. They sat up straighter on the love seat, their eyes widening as they processed the words. They were the reason. They were the motive for the crime. The recording continued mercilessly. "Make sure you leave enough in there so she does not notice immediately," my father's voice rumbled, filled with disdain. "But listen to me, Patricia. Do not invite her to the main dinner on Christmas Eve, because the Walkers are classy people. They do not want to see a 32-year-old spinster at the table. She ruins the family aesthetic." The silence that followed the recording was heavier than the snow outside. It was a suffocating blanket of truth that smothered every lie they had told for the last week. My father looked at the sheriff, who was unsmiling. My mother looked at me, her eyes pleading for mercy I did not have. But the most volatile reaction came from the love seat. Mr. Walker stood up slowly. He was a man who had built his own fortune in construction, a man who valued hard work and integrity above all else. His face was gray with shock. He looked at the luxurious villa around him, then at the shivering group of frauds huddled in the center of the room. He turned slowly to face Kyle. His movements were stiff with controlled rage. "You told us your wife was a genius," Mr. Walker said, his voice low and dangerous. "You told us Bianca was a silent partner in a tech firm. You told us she bought this estate with her bonus check. You told us you were renting the Porsche because your own car was being detailed." Kyle tried to speak, but only a squeak came out. Mr. Walker took a step closer, towering over his son-in-law. "But that recording says different," he continued. "That recording says you are not a partner. It says you are a thief. You stole $50,000 from your sister-in-law just to rent a car to impress me. Is that what you did, Kyle? Did you steal from this woman to lie to my face?" Kyle looked at Bianca for help, but she was sobbing into her hands. He looked at my parents, but they were staring at the floor. He was alone. "I did it for us?" Kyle whispered, his voice trembling. "I just wanted you to respect me." "Respect you?" Mr. Walker roared, the sound making everyone jump. "You think I respect a man who steals from family? You think I respect a liar? You brought us to a stranger's house in a stolen car funded by a stolen credit card. You are not a businessman, Kyle. You are a criminal." Mrs. Walker stood up beside her husband, her face pale. She looked at my mother, Patricia, with a look of pure disgust. "And you," she said, her voice shaking, "you went along with it. You banned your own daughter from Christmas just to put on a show for us? I have never been so ashamed to be associated with anyone in my life." The mask was gone. The classy aesthetic my father wanted so badly had been replaced by the ugly reality of their greed. And the Walkers, who they had tried so hard to impress, were looking at them like they were something stuck to the bottom of a shoe. Marcus cleared his throat, drawing the attention back to the legal matters at hand. "Now that we have established the intent behind the theft," Marcus said, opening the file in his lap, "let us discuss the numbers, because unfortunately for you, $50,000 was just the appetizer." I pressed a button on the smart remote, and the 85-inch screen above the fireplace flickered to life. It was no longer displaying a loop of serene winter landscapes. Instead, it was mirroring the display of my iPad, which was currently open to a high-resolution PDF of my bank statement. The room was silent, save for the crackling fire, as the numbers filled the screen in crisp, undeniable detail. I stood up and walked toward the television, my silk gown swishing softly against the floor. I felt like a professor about to deliver the most painful lecture of the semester. "Let us review the investment portfolio you mentioned to the Walkers," I said, my voice calm and carrying to the back of the room. "Let us see where $50,000 actually went in just 5 days. I scrolled down the list. The entries were highlighted in neon yellow. December 20th, $5,000 to Elite Exotics car rental, I read aloud, pointing to the line item. That would be for the Porsche currently freezing at the bottom of my driveway, a non-refundable deposit for a car you claim to own. I scrolled again. December 21st, $4,000 to Saks Fifth Avenue for the dress Bianca is wearing right now and the watch on Kyle's wrist. Kyle instinctively covered his wrist with his other hand, but Mr. Walker saw it. He looked at the watch, a flashy gold piece he probably thought was a sign of his son's success, and realized it was stolen goods. December 22nd, I continued, my voice hardening, $2,000 to a nightclub in Buckhead, bottle service. You told your parents you were working late on a merger, Kyle. Apparently, the merger was with a bottle of Grey Goose. The list went on. Designer shoes, expensive dinners, a deposit for a vacation to Cabo that they planned to take in January. It was a catalog of vanity and waste. There were no investments, there were no stocks. It was just a desperate attempt to look rich using someone else's labor. My mother, Patricia, stared at the screen, her hand covering her mouth. She had seen the spending, but seeing it itemized, seeing the sheer waste of it in black and white, seemed to break something in her. She looked at the daughter she had favored, the golden child, who was supposed to be the smart one, and saw only a spendthrift with no self-control. But I'm not done, I said, tapping the screen to switch to the next document, because while you were spending my money, I decided to look into yours, or rather, the lack thereof. The screen changed. It was now displaying a comprehensive credit report and background check for Kyle. The numbers were in bold red. Credit score, 412, I read aloud. Current employment status, terminated for cause 6 months ago. Outstanding debt, $85,000, excluding the $50,000 you just stole from me. I turned to look at Mr. Walker. He told you were a partner in a firm. The truth is, he was fired for padding expense reports. He is not an investor, sir. He is an unemployed. He has 7 maxed-out credit cards and 3 payday loans that are currently in default. The only thing he owns is the debt he is drowning in. The room was silent. You could hear the wind howling outside. Kyle had sunk into the ottoman, his head in his hands, his facade completely shattered. He was not a businessman. He was a broke, desperate man who had married a vain, desperate woman, and together they had tried to fake their way to the top. Then the silence broke. It was a shriek, a raw, primal scream of frustration and exposure. Bianca jumped up from her seat, her face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. She pointed a shaking finger at me, her eyes bulging.
"You set us up," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You did this on purpose. You left that phone on the counter. You knew I knew the passcode. You practically begged me to take it. You wanted us to spend it so you could humiliate us." She looked around the room, seeking allies, but finding none. "It is entrapment," she yelled, desperation making her incoherent. "She left the door open. She wanted me to walk through it. It is her fault. She tricked us." I looked at my sister. I looked at the girl who had bullied me for years, who had mocked my work and my life, who had plotted to erase me from my own family. And I felt nothing but pity. I took a step closer to her until I was looking down into her tear-stained face. "I left my phone on the counter in my parents' house," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "A house where I should have been safe. A house where I should have been able to trust my family." I leaned in. "You picked it up, Bianca. You entered the code. You opened the banking app. You typed in the numbers. And you hit transfer. I did not force your hand. I just gave you the opportunity to show everyone who you really are." I straightened up and looked at the sheriff. "Theft is theft, Bianca. Do not blame the victim because you were dumb enough to take the bait." The silence in the room was thick enough to choke on, but I was not done. I had one more card to play, one more witness to call to the stand. I turned slightly and gestured toward the back of the room where Mr. Sterling had been standing quietly by the Christmas tree, sipping his scotch and watching the proceedings with the grim expression of a judge at a sentencing hearing. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice soft but carrying clearly across the room, "perhaps you could clear up the confusion regarding Kyle's departure from your firm. My sister seems to labor under the delusion that her husband left to build an empire. I think it is time she knew the truth about why he really cleared out his desk." Kyle's head snapped up, his eyes locked onto his former boss, and the color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. He made a small, strangling noise in his throat, a desperate plea for silence. But Mr. Sterling was a man of principle, and he had no patience for thieves. Mr. Sterling stepped forward, setting his glass down on a side table with a deliberate click. He walked into the center of the room, ignoring my parents, and looking directly at Mr. Walker. "I did not want to make this public, Jim," Mr. Sterling said, addressing Kyle's father by his first name. They moved in the same circles, they belonged to the same clubs. That was why I invited him. I knew his word would carry weight that mine never could. "I fired your son 6 months ago," Mr. Sterling continued, his voice devoid of pity. He did not resign. He did not leave to pursue other opportunities. He was terminated for cause. We found discrepancies in the client escrow accounts, small amounts at first, then larger ones. He was using client funds to pay for personal luxury items, watches, dinners, trips. Bianca let out a gasp, her hands flying to her mouth. She looked at the gold watch on Kyle's wrist, the one she thought was a sign of success, and realized it was evidence of a crime. "We chose not to press charges at the time because of my respect for you and your family," Mr. Sterling said, looking at Mr. Walker with genuine sympathy. "We allowed him to pay back what he stole and leave quietly. I assumed he had learned his lesson. I see now that I was mistaken. He has simply moved on to stealing from his wife's family instead." Mr. Walker closed his eyes as if in physical pain. The shame radiating off him was palpable. He was a proud man, a man who built his reputation on integrity, and his son had just destroyed it in front of a room full of Atlanta's elite. When Mr. Walker opened his eyes again, they were hard as flint. He turned to Kyle, who was shaking like a leaf in a storm. "You lied to me," Mr. Walker said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You looked me in the eye and told me you were building a business. You told me you needed that loan last month for overhead. You were using it to pay back money you stole." "Dad, please," Kyle begged, tears streaming down his face. "I can fix this. I just need a little more time." "No," Mr. Walker roared, and the sound echoed off the glass walls. "No more time, no more money. You are done, Kyle. I am cutting you off. The trust fund is frozen. The allowance is gone. Do not call me for bail money. Do not call me for rent. You are on your own." Mrs. Walker stepped forward, her face pinched with disgust. She looked at Bianca, who was standing frozen beside her husband. "And as for you," she spat, "you and your family are nothing but grifters. You saw us as a bank account. You thought you could marry my son and live off our hard work." She turned back to Kyle. "If you want any hope of reconciling with this family, you will annul this marriage immediately. You will leave these people and you will get a job, a real job, or you can rot in the street with them." The ultimatum hung in the air. Divorce the wife who conspired with him or lose his fortune forever. Kyle looked at his parents, then he looked at Bianca. I saw the calculation in his eyes. I saw the moment self-preservation overrode love. He took a half step away from Bianca, creating a physical distance that spoke volumes. Bianca saw it too. She saw her husband retreating. She saw the Walkers looking at her like she was vermin. She saw my parents cowering in the corner, stripped of their pride. She realized that the Porsche, the villa, the lifestyle she had been posting about for days was all gone. Her reality was crashing down and she had no way to stop it.
So she did what she always did when things got too hard. She decided to be the victim. Her eyes rolled back in her head, she let out a soft moan and crumpled to the floor in a heap of designer silk and stolen money. It was a beautiful faint, staged perfectly to land on the plush rug rather than the marble floor. My mother shrieked, rushing to her side, "Bianca, baby, wake up! Someone call a doctor!" I watched from my chair, sipping my champagne. I did not move. I did not call for help. I knew my sister. I knew she was awake. I knew she was listening, waiting for someone to save her, waiting for the sympathy to shift back in her direction. But no one moved. The room just watched the performance with cold detachment. The golden child had fallen, and for the first time in her life, nobody was running to pick her up. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the heavy breathing of the guilty. Sheriff Miller stepped forward, his boots echoing on the marble floor. He did not look at the crying woman on the rug or the trembling man beside her. He looked at the evidence. "Enough of the theatrics," the sheriff said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Ma'am, you can get up on your own, or my deputies can assist you. Either way, you are leaving this property in handcuffs." Bianca's eyes snapped open. The miracle of medicine was instantaneous. She scrambled backward, crab-walking across the expensive wool rug until her back hit the legs of the sofa. "Handcuffs?" she squeaked, looking from the sheriff to me. "Zara, tell him to stop. This is a family matter." "It ceased to be a family matter when you crossed state lines with stolen funds," I said, swirling the last sip of champagne in my glass. "It became a federal matter." Sheriff Miller motioned to his deputy, who was standing by the door. They moved in on Kyle first. He did not fight. He looked defeated, a man who knew the gamble had failed spectacularly. He held out his wrists, the gold watch glinting under the chandelier lights, as the steel cuffs clicked shut. The sound was mechanical and final, echoing off the high ceilings. "Kyle Walker," the sheriff intoned, reciting the words that every criminal dreads. "You are under arrest for grand larceny, identity theft, and wire fraud." Then they turned to Bianca. She screamed. It was not a word, just a noise of pure terror. She looked at her mother, then at the Walkers, begging with her eyes for someone to intervene. But the Walkers turned their backs, literally rotating their bodies to face the window, refusing to witness the shame of their association. "Mom!" Bianca wailed as the deputy pulled her to her feet. The silk dress she had bought with my money bunched up awkwardly as her hands were pulled behind her back. "Mom, do something. He is hurting me. Zara is crazy. She gave me permission." "We have the recording, ma'am," the deputy said calmly, tightening the cuffs, "and the bank records. Save it for the judge." My mother, Patricia, had been frozen in shock, but seeing her golden child in restraints broke her paralysis. She did not run to the police. She did not scream at the Walkers. She ran to me. She threw herself on the floor at my feet. My mother, the woman who cared more about appearances than breathing, the woman who had banned me from her house to protect her aesthetic, was now on her knees on my rug, clutching the hem of my silver gown. "Zara, please," she sobbed, her mascara running down her cheeks in black rivulets. "She is your sister. She's just a baby. She did not mean it. You cannot let them take her to jail. It will ruin her life. She won't survive in there." I looked at her. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel joy. I felt a profound sense of hollowness. This was the woman who was supposed to protect me, and even now her only concern was the daughter who had robbed me. "She ruined her own life, Mom," I said, pulling my dress from her grip. "I will do anything," my mother begged, her voice rising in hysteria. "I will do anything you want. Just tell them to stop. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Please, Zara, be the bigger person. Be the good daughter I know you are." The room went silent. Everyone was watching us. The guests, the police, the Walkers. It was the moment of ultimate leverage. "Anything?" I asked, my voice soft. Yes, anything," she cried, nodding frantically. "Okay," I said. I leaned down so I was eye level with her. "If you really want to save her, it is very simple. Write me a check for $50,000 right now. Pay me back every cent they stole, plus the interest, plus the legal fees. If you hand me a cashier's check or transfer the cash into my account in the next 5 minutes, I will tell the sheriff I want to drop the charges. I will call it a loan." My mother froze. Her mouth hung open, but no words came out. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for a solution that did not exist. She looked at my father, Desmond, who had turned his pockets inside out mentally and found nothing but lint. They did not have $50,000. They did not have $5,000. They had spent everything they had on the appearance of wealth, leveraging every asset they owned to maintain the facade. "We do not have it liquid," she stammered, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The house is leveraged. The retirement account, Zara, you know we do not have that kind of money sitting around." "I know," I said, standing up and smoothing my dress. "I know you do not, because you spent your life pretending to be rich instead of actually building wealth. You spent your life judging me for saving while you were drowning in debt." I looked at the sheriff and nodded. "Take them away." "No!" my mother shrieked as the deputies began to march Bianca and Kyle toward the door. My sister and her husband were dragged out into the snow, their cries fading into the wind. My mother stayed on the floor, weeping into the rug, a broken woman in a rented dress, realizing too late that the daughter she had thrown away was the only one who could have saved her, and I just closed the vault. The party guests watched in stunned silence, a mixture of awe and horror on their faces. I turned back to the room, picked up a fresh glass of champagne, and raised it to the empty doorway. "To family," I said, taking a sip, "and to the high cost of tuition. School is dismissed." The flashing red and blue lights of the sheriff's cruiser painted the snow in violent strokes of color. As my sister and her husband were placed in the back seat, I watched through the window, holding my champagne flute like a shield. Bianca was pressing her face against the glass, her makeup smeared into a mask of despair, mouthing words I could not hear but could easily guess. She was begging, she was blaming, she was realizing that for the first time in her life, the consequences were not going to disappear just because she cried. Kyle sat beside her, staring straight ahead, his jaw slack with the shock of a man whose house of cards had not just fallen but had been set on fire. As the cruiser pulled away, its tires crunching on the packed ice, a silence settled over the driveway. It was not a peaceful silence. It was the vacuum left by a disaster. Inside the villa, the air was still warm and scented with expensive candles, but the mood had shifted from celebration to execution. Titus, my head of security, approached my parents. He did not need to speak. His presence alone was a command. He gestured toward the door, his hand sweeping through the air with the finality of a judge's gavel. My mother, Patricia, looked around the room one last time, her eyes lingering on the fire, the food, the warmth she was about to lose. She looked at me, but I turned my back. I walked over to the fireplace and warmed my hands, watching the flames dance. I heard the heavy oak door open. I heard the wind howl as it rushed into the foyer, snatching at their clothes like a hungry beast. And then I heard the door close. The lock clicked with a sound that felt like closure. Outside, the reality of their situation hit them with the force of a blizzard. I watched on the security monitor as they stood on the heated pavers of my driveway, shivering in their inadequate coats. Their rental SUV was miles away, stuck in a snowbank, dead and useless. Their credit cards were frozen blocks of plastic. They had no cash, they had no clan, and they had no friends. The Walkers, Kyle's parents, were the final nail in the coffin. They had evidently called a private car service while the arrests were happening. A sleek black town car pulled up to the gate, its headlights cutting through the swirling snow. The driver stepped out, opening the door for Mrs. Walker. She gathered her coat around her, stepping carefully over the ice, ignoring my mother, who reached out a trembling hand toward her. "Carol, please," my mother cried, her voice thin and desperate in the wind. "We cannot stay here. We will freeze. Please, just give us a ride to town, just to a hotel." Mrs. Walker stopped. She turned slowly and looked at my mother with a gaze so cold it made the winter air feel tropical. "I do not know you," she said, her voice flat. I do not know your daughter. I do not know your thief of a son-in-law. As far as I am concerned, this entire family is a bad memory I am going to forget by morning. Do not speak to me again." She got into the car. Mr. Walker followed, slamming the door shut without even glancing at my father. The town car pulled away, its taillights fading into the whiteout, leaving my parents standing alone in the dark. They were isolated on the side of a mountain in the middle of a blizzard with nothing but their pride, which was currently freezing to death. I moved to the window, looking down at them. They looked like statues carved from misery. My father, Desmond, was pacing back and forth, rubbing his arms, trying to generate heat. My mother was huddled against him, weeping into his shoulder. They were checking their phones frantically, likely realizing that Uber was not an option when you have zero available credit and you are in a private estate zone. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was my father. I looked at the screen, watching his name flash. I could see him down there, holding the phone to his ear, his face turned up toward the window where I stood. He knew I was watching. He knew I was warm. He knew I held the keys to the kingdom he had been exiled from. I slid my thumb across the screen and answered, putting the phone to my ear. I did not say anything. I just listened to the sound of the wind whipping around him. "Zara," he shouted over the gale, his voice cracking. "Zara, please, it is freezing. We are going to die out here." "You are not going to die, Dad," I said, calm and detached. "It is 20 degrees. Uncomfortable? Yes. Fatal? Not immediately. You can walk to the main road. There is a gas station about 4 miles down." "4 miles?" he sputtered. "Your mother cannot walk 4 miles in snow. She's wearing heels." "That sounds like a planning error," I said, taking a sip of my drink. "Maybe she should have worn boots, or maybe you should not have stolen $50,000 and driven into a blizzard to harass me." There was a silence on the line, a heavy pause filled only by the sound of his ragged breathing. Then his voice changed. The anger drained out of it, leaving only a hollow, broken rasp. "I am sorry, Zara. I am so sorry, Zara. I was wrong. I was wrong about everything. About Bianca, about you. I should have protected you. I should have been a better father. Please, I'm begging you, let us in." I closed my eyes for a second, letting the words wash over me. I had waited 32 years to hear those words. I had spent my entire life trying to be good enough, smart enough, successful enough to make him say them. And now that he finally had, they felt empty. They weren't born of love or realization. They were born of cold and fear. They were currency he was trying to spend to buy a ticket out of the snow. I looked down at the man shivering in my driveway. I looked at the woman clinging to his arm. I thought about the hospital bills I paid alone. I thought about the graduation they missed. I thought about the Christmas dinners where I was made to feel small. "Your apology is noted, Dad," I said, my voice soft but unyielding. "But you taught me something important today. You taught me that everything has a cost. You tried to buy a lifestyle you couldn't afford with my money. You tried to buy respect with lies. And now you're trying to buy warmth with words you don't mean." I watched him look up at the window, his face a pale blur in the snow. "Here's the thing about the real world, Dad," I said, my hand hovering over the end call button. "Words are cheap. Action is expensive. And right now, your account is overdrawn. An apology doesn't pay the bills, Dad." I hung up the phone. I watched for another moment as he stared at the device in his hand, as if it had betrayed him. Then I turned away from the window. I walked back to the fire, back to my guests, back to the warmth I had built with my own 2 hands. I left them in the cold, where they belonged. 6 months is a lifetime in the business world, but it feels like an eternity in the criminal justice system. The snow has long melted from the peaks of Aspen, but the freeze in my family relations has hardened into permafrost. I have not spoken to them since that night in the driveway, but I do not need to call them to know how their lives are unraveling. I have the court transcripts and the public records. Bianca took a plea deal to avoid prison time. Her lawyer managed to argue for leniency based on her lack of prior convictions, but the judge was not charmed by her tears. She is currently serving 3 years of probation, wearing a GPS ankle monitor that clashes horribly with her wardrobe. Her days of being a digital influencer are over. The internet does not forgive, and it certainly does not forget. Her follower count dropped to 0 overnight, replaced by trolls and commentary channels dissecting her downfall. She works now, not as a silent partner in a tech firm, but as a night shift stocking clerk at a discount warehouse. It was the only place that would hire someone with a grand larceny conviction on their record. She spends her nights lifting heavy boxes of merchandise she can no longer afford to buy. Kyle was not so lucky. Because he had a prior history of embezzlement and because he crossed state lines with stolen funds, the federal prosecutor made an example of him. He is currently serving 18 months in a minimum security facility. He lost his real estate license permanently. The Walkers, true to their word, filed for an annulment on his behalf and cut him out of the will completely. When he gets out, he will have nothing. No wife, no money, no career, and a family name that he has disgraced beyond repair. But the most tragic figures in this Shakespearean drama are my parents. The house in Cascade, the beautiful brick home that I had quietly paid off for them 2 years ago, is gone. They had to sell it in a fire sale to pay the restitution for Bianca and the exorbitant legal fees for the defense attorneys. They drained their retirement accounts. They sold the furniture. They sold the jewelry. They sold the very image they had spent a lifetime cultivating just to keep their golden child out of a cell. They live now in a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex near the airport. The walls are thin and the neighbors are loud. The carpets smell of stale smoke and old cooking oil. There are no more garden parties. There are no more bridge clubs. The social circle they valued so highly evaporated the moment the moving trucks arrived. The church was the hardest blow for my father. Desmond Wilson had been a deacon, a pillar of the community, a man who sat in the front pew and passed judgment on others. But the scandal was too loud and too public. The board asked him to step down. The pastor suggested they find a new congregation. They went from being the first family of the church to pariahs who sit in the back row, hoping no one notices their frayed coats and scuffed shoes. They lost their standing, they lost their dignity, and they lost the only child who actually had the means to support them in their old age. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the final blow landed. My mother, Patricia, was standing in the checkout line at a grocery store, counting out coupons with trembling hands. She looked older now, her hair graying at the roots because she could no longer afford the salon. My father stood beside her, staring vacantly at the floor, holding a basket containing store-brand bread and canned soup. As the cashier scanned their items with a rhythmic beep, my mother glanced to her left at the magazine rack. It was filled with the usual tabloids and gossip rags, but right in the center, at eye level, was the new issue of Forbes. She froze. Her hands stopped midair, holding a crumpled dollar bill. She stared at the cover. She blinked, trying to process what she was seeing. It was me. I was wearing a white power suit, standing on the balcony of my Aspen villa, the mountains rising majestically behind me. My arms were crossed, and my expression was one of calm, unshakable power. The headline was printed in bold gold letters that seemed to shimmer under the fluorescent lights of the grocery store. "The Silent Strategist," it read. How Zara Wilson built a luxury empire from the shadows and became the new face of self-made wealth. My mother made a small, choking sound. She reached out and touched the glossy paper, as if testing to see if it was real. My father looked up, his eyes following her hand. He saw it too. He saw the daughter he had called a failure. He saw the spinster he had banned from dinner. He saw the woman whose money he had tried to steal. He read the subtext below the headline. Net worth estimated at $20 million and climbing. The cashier cleared her throat. "Ma'am, are you going to pay for those beans or not?" My mother looked at the cashier, then back at the magazine. She looked at the beans in her basket. The contrast was absolute. She was counting pennies to buy dinner, while the daughter she had thrown away was being celebrated as a titan of industry. "I know her," my mother whispered, her voice cracking. "That is my daughter." The cashier popped her gum and looked at the cover, then back at the woman in the faded coat. "Sure it is, honey," she said with a dismissive laugh. "And I'm the Queen of England. That will be $12.50. My father pulled my mother away, his hand gripping her arm tightly. He did not say a word. He could not. The shame was a physical weight crushing the air from his lungs. They left the magazine there in the rack, a glossy testament to everything they had lost. They walked out of the store into the gray drizzle of a Tuesday afternoon, carrying their cheap groceries and the heavy burden of knowing that they had held a diamond in their hands and thrown it away because they thought it was glass. It is my 33rd birthday, and the mountains that were once covered in snow are now green and alive with summer. The infinity pool reflects the blue sky, and the air smells of jasmine and expensive sunscreen. I'm sitting on a lounge chair, wearing a swimsuit that makes me feel powerful, not just rich. Around me, the villa is buzzing with life, but this time it's the right kind of life. Aunt May is sitting under a cabana, laughing with Elena, my business partner. She is holding a glass of iced tea and looks 10 years younger than she did back in Atlanta. There is no tension here. There is no walking on eggshells. There is just the easy rhythm of people who genuinely like each other. Next to me, David squeezes my hand. He's an architect I met 3 months ago. He does not know about the Porsche or the $50,000 or the night I left my parents in the snow. He just knows me. He knows I like my coffee black and that I work too hard and that I am fiercely protective of the peace I have built. He leans over and kisses my cheek. And for the first time in my life, I do not wonder what he wants from me. I know he just wants to be here. But the past has a way of trying to reach out from the grave. Earlier that morning, the mail arrived. Buried between investment statements and birthday cards was a gray envelope with a stamp that made my stomach turn. Department of Corrections. I picked it up now, holding it between 2 fingers like it was contaminated. It was from Bianca. I did not need to open it to know what it said, but I did anyway. The handwriting was jagged and desperate. "Zara, please," she wrote. "The public defender is useless. They are going to make me serve the full term. I need a real lawyer. I need money for the appeal. Mom says you will not take her calls. We are sisters, Zara. Blood is thicker than water. You cannot leave me in here." I read the words and waited for the guilt. I waited for the old familiar pang of obligation, the voice in my head that said I was the big sister and it was my job to fix things. But it did not come. All I felt was a mild annoyance, like a fly buzzing near my ear. "Blood is thicker than water," she said. It was the lie they had used to manipulate me for decades. They used blood like a chain to bind me to their toxicity while they drained me dry. I looked at David. I looked at Aunt May laughing in the sun. I looked at the life I had curated, the empire I had built, and the peace I had fought for. I stood up and walked to the fire pit at the edge of the patio. It was lit for ambiance, the flames dancing in the daylight. I held the letter over the fire. I watched the corner turn brown, then black, then burst into orange flame. I watched Bianca's desperate scrawl turn to ash. I watched the guilt and the obligation and the manipulation drift away on the wind as smoke. I dropped the burning paper into the pit and watched it crumble into nothing. Aunt May looked over and raised her glass, a silent question in her eyes. I smiled and picked up my wine. I walked back to my chair and sat down, taking a crisp, cold Chardonnay. David looked at me. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Everything is perfect," I said. I looked out at the mountains and finally understood the lesson it took me 32 years to learn. Family is not about whose DNA you share. It is not about obligation or history or shared last names. Family are the people who love you when you have nothing to give them. Family are the people who celebrate your wins without jealousy. Family are the people who lift you up, not the blood relatives who just want to suck you dry. I took another sip of wine, closed my eyes, and let the sun warm my face. I was alone in the best way possible. I was free.